foreseeing the issue that our schools are still segregated, and that's one reason for the issues we're dealing with. Does that come into this conversation at all, to the two of you?
I think you can't talk about schools without talking about issues of power and privilege and race and all of those things you just mentioned. And I think that's something that's not always explicitly stated in these conversations. Researchers talk about this silence dialogue about power and powerlessness. And when we're not really confronting that head on, the people who have the power benefit, and the people who don't have the power continue to not benefit from those systems. And so when we look at things like education systems, there's structural inequalities that have been there for decades, right? And are still impacting what's happening in our schools, and we're not talking about it. So it's not being addressed head on.
It seems like a very strong affirmative head nod. You agree? You agree?
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, most of the kids affected by this are poor Black and brown children, so that obviously has this horrible effect, right, where they get caught up in under-resourced schools, failing institutions, and they feel the brunt of it, I think.
So
I should say. Yeah.
So, okay, so how would you like to see, we're talking about all these different plans that are being put on the table, what would you like to see in them to address these very issues?
I think that one of the pieces that might be missing or not as holistically included is that people are experts on their own lives, right? So parents in these communities, whether they're riddled with poverty and all of the problems that come with that, are experts on their own lives. And they do not have a voice in the conversation, and they're maybe not holding legislators and DESE and school districts accountable, right? That accountability needs to be coming both ways, but we've disenfranchised communities when we talk only about their deficiencies. We've degraded their ability to recognize their own expertise about, they know their communities, they know their children better than anybody else. And they need to have that voice at the table. And so one of the things that we need to encourage, and outsiders cannot make decisions for communities. However, there are tools that we can equip communities with to get them doing community organizing and doing some of those community schools and wraparound services that the superintendents were mentioning. And there's examples of that are happening all over the country. And so before we come in and kind of say we're going to pull all the resources and let students start leaving your school district, we need to look at, as a region, how have we disenfranchised certain communities in our region? And how have we not allowed them to be experts on their own children?
One of the things I would really like to see, and I certainly had hoped that this was going to happen in June of 2010, when the first Missouri Supreme Court decision came down, was that the legislature was going to change the law. As a parent, if I were a parent in a unaccredited school district, reading that law, I'm like, wow, this is great. My kid can now, has some guarantee of a better education. But when you look a little closer and we see the effects of it now, it's actually a horrible law because it is destroying communities. It is bankrupting school districts. It is getting kids up at the crack of dawn and busing them in 2-3 hour bus rides into other communities where the teachers are not really trained to deal with them, right? And so there's a tremendous hardship on these kids. The law is I think, needs to be, the legislature has got to repeal this statute. That would be first. Second, and picking up a little bit on what she was saying, we really have to start also taking a whole child approach. I mean, there are lots of issues that these children are dealing with. And so even if we sort of say, okay, we're going to fix education, that might not necessarily solve the problem. I mean, people need adequate health care, people need nutritious food, people need safe neighborhoods, they need affordable housing. I mean, there are lots of pieces, right, that are going to give you the child who is ready to receive in the classroom.
We hear a lot of the kids start at a very different place.
Right,
when
right.
they come into school.
Right.
But we expect them to end at very similar places.
Right, exactly.
Well, we also talk about kids enter kindergarten and we label them as behind. And I have a real problem with that, because how can you be behind before you've even started? So what we're saying is, unless you knew all of the structures that schools expect to be in place, right? Unless you're in the power structure, you're up there and you understand the implicit rules and all of these hidden agendas that some of us just are born into families knowing. If you didn't know that from the time you were born until you entered kindergarten, we label you as behind before you've even started. And that's really problematic. And the messages that we send to communities about that, I think, can be really powerful and make people feel helpless.